A faithful German shepherd named Rex was abandoned at an airport when his owner left him behind. For nearly 2 years, Rex waited by the runway, watching every plane that took off, believing his master would return. Along the way, he found a friend in Nicholas, a lonely boy grieving his mother's death. Together, they healed each other's broken hearts. When the world learned about Rex through newspapers, thousands of people were touched by his loyalty. Finally, a kind woman gave Rex a new home, where he lived with love and dignity, no longer cold and alone. His story became a symbol of loyalty and hope that inspired an entire nation. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel to watch the next stories by clicking the subscribe button right below this video. Thank you. Amen. The winter of 1974 in Moscow pressed down on the city like an old gray quilt, heavy with damp snow and iron-colored skies. Outside the capital, at Vnukovo International Airport, the air smelled of kerosene, wet wool, and smoke from nearby chimneys, carried by the wind across the frozen tarmac. The ground crews shuffled in thick coats and fur-lined hats, their boots leaving slushy trails through the icy puddles that gathered along the runways. The terminal itself, built in a severe style of concrete and glass, loomed like a fortress of departure and longing, its windows glowing faintly with the golden warmth of lamps inside, contrasting the cold blue world outside. It was here, in this place of arrivals and departures, where the story of a dog named Rex began to etch itself into the memory of all who passed through. Rex was a German shepherd, around 5 years old, with a strong, muscular build that spoke of both discipline and endurance. His fur was a dense sable coat-black saddle across his back with tan legs and chest that carried a sheen despite the harsh weather. His eyes, amber and luminous, carried intelligence and loyalty, but on this morning they flickered with confusion and dread. He had once been a working dog, trained to obey, to guard, to accompany his owner everywhere, and it showed in his proud posture. Yet the chain leash in his master's hand had been trembling as they approached the check-in counter, and Rex had sensed in the tension of the man's shoulders and the quick beat of his heart that something was wrong. The man, whose name would never be remembered by the airport staff, was a tall, pale figure in his late 30s with a narrow face, dark hair combed severely back, and tired eyes that hinted at a life burdened with compromises. He wore a gray overcoat too thin for the Moscow winter, and his briefcase, scratched and stuffed with documents, never left his grip. He was not cruel by nature, but anxious, a man pressed by circumstances. Somewhere beyond the border he was flying toward lay promises of a job, of money, of a new beginning. And yet, in his hurry and desperation, he had failed to obtain the necessary veterinary papers for his dog. At the check-in desk, a clerk in uniform had examined his documents, pursed her lips, and shook her head. She was a woman in her 40s, with a scarf tied beneath her chin, her face square and firm, a woman who had seen countless pleading passengers try to bend the rules. She simply pointed to the regulation sheet on the wall. No animal could be taken on the flight without proper veterinary clearance. Her voice was clipped, bureaucratic, final. The man argued, his hands restless, his voice low and desperate, but Rex sat obediently by his side, ears alert, tail still, sensing the rising storm in his master's chest. After a few moments of hopeless debate, the man's shoulders slumped. He looked down at Rex, who gazed up with trust that cut deeper than any blade. The man bent, pressed a hurried kiss against the dog's head, muttered something that might have been, "I'll come back," and then, with a sudden jerk, handed the leash to no one at all, simply letting it fall to the tiled floor. Rex barked once sharply, confusion bursting from his chest, but the man turned and walked away, swallowed by the flow of passengers, his coat blending into the crowd until he was gone. Rex tried to follow, claws clattering against the tiles, but the leash tangled around a chair. By the time he freed himself, the man had passed through security and vanished. The barking carried through the terminal, sharp and raw, echoing beneath the vaulted ceiling. People turned their heads. Some frowned, others murmured with pity. Rex stood there, panting, eyes wide, chest heaving with betrayal he could not understand. The check-in clerk sighed, muttered to a colleague about "another one left behind," and returned to her work. Hours passed. Outside, the snow thickened, flakes sticking to Rex's fur as he stood near the glass doors, watching figures move toward the planes. His breath steamed against the glass as he pressed his nose to it, searching. Each time an aircraft engine roared, his ears shot up. Each time a boarding call rang out over the loudspeaker, his tail twitched in anticipation, but the man never returned. Rex spent the night in the shadows of the terminal, curled near a heating pipe, his body pressed low against the cold floor. The cleaning staff, weary women with scarves over their hair and hands reddened by work, stepped around him. One of them, a short woman with round cheeks and tired eyes named Galena, paused briefly, watching the shepherd with quiet compassion. She had 3 children at home in a small apartment, and her husband drank more than he worked. Life had taught her about abandonment and disappointment. She bent down, slid a crust of bread from her pocket, and placed it near Rex. He sniffed, accepted it cautiously, and when she smiled faintly and whispered, "Poor soul," his ears lowered in acknowledgement. The next morning, travelers bustled once more through the halls of Vnukovo. Rex was still there, stationed near the main entrance as though on duty. The porters, men in heavy coats dragging carts stacked with luggage, noticed him. One, a wiry fellow named Yevgeny, muttered, "Another fool who thought loyalty could buy a ticket." His tone was rough, but when Rex followed him a few steps, tail low but wagging faintly, the man clicked his tongue and tossed him a piece of sausage from his pocket. Day after day, Rex remained. He learned the rhythms of the airport, the shift changes of the guards, the times when cleaning staff moved through, the smell of food drifting from the small cafeteria on the second floor. But most of all, he learned to watch the runways. Whenever a plane of the same model his master had boarded, the IL-18 with its 4 propellers taxied across the field, Rex would bound to the fence, ears forward, eyes burning with hope. Passengers began to notice. Children pointed, tugging at their mothers' coats. "Mama, look, the dog is waiting for someone." Some adults smiled softly, some shook their heads, whispering about cruelty and devotion. Rex became a silent witness to the ceaseless movement of humanity, departures filled with hope, arrivals tinged with relief, and himself always waiting. Winter turned harsher. Snow piled high against the walls, the wind whipped across the open tarmac, and still Rex endured. His fur grew matted, his ribs faintly visible beneath his coat, yet his eyes, amber and steady, never lost their searching. He belonged nowhere but to that waiting. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the airport was nearly empty, his howl rose against the whine of the engines, a cry of longing carried out across the cold Moscow sky. The days stretched into weeks, and still Rex haunted the perimeter of Vnukovo Airport like a shadow stitched to the snow and steel. His coat had grown rougher from sleeping in the drafts of the terminal, his once proud gait slowed by hunger, yet his eyes never lost their burning search. Every propeller plane that howled down the runway pulled him to his feet, his body taut with hope, and each disappointment deepened the silence of his watch. It was on one such afternoon, when the February sky sagged heavy with pale light and slanting snow, that a boy named Nicholas first noticed the lone German shepherd waiting by the fence near the southern gates. Nicholas was 9 years old, small for his age, his frame thin beneath a wool coat a size too big for him. His face was pale, cheeks hollow with the kind of sadness that does not come from illness, but from grief. His dark brown hair, usually unruly, was half hidden under a knitted cap his grandmother had made, the threads pulled loose from wear. His eyes, large and soft brown like thawing earth, carried an absence of laughter that made adults look away. Nicholas had lost his mother the previous autumn, an illness that struck quickly, leaving only silence in their apartment and the faint scent of her perfume clinging to curtains. Since then, he had lived with his father, a pilot named Victor, whose work consumed him, and whose way of grieving was to bury sorrow under routine and silence. Nicholas rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was quiet, almost tentative, as though testing whether the world was ready to listen. On this day, Victor had brought Nicholas to the airport earlier than necessary. Victor was in his mid-30s, tall with a lean build hardened by years of military training before transferring to civilian aviation. His dark blonde hair was cropped short, streaked faintly with early gray, his square jawline perpetually shadowed by stubble from neglected shaves. His eyes, a sharp steel blue, revealed both competence and distance, eyes trained to navigate skies but reluctant to face the storms within his home. He wore his pilot's uniform impeccably, the brass buttons polished, the cap tucked under his arm, his stride brisk. He was not unkind, but he was a man weighed down by absence, struggling to raise a boy who mirrored his own loneliness. While Victor attended a briefing inside, Nicholas wandered near the fence where Rex kept his vigil. The boy's boots crunched softly over ice, his breath rising in small clouds, when he spotted the dog. Rex stood with his nose pressed to the wire, amber eyes locked on the runway as if every plane might deliver the man who had left him. His body was tense, shoulders squared, tail lowered, but not tucked a soldier, waiting for orders that would never come. Nicholas stopped, captivated. He felt something stir in him, a kinship unspoken. He too was waiting for someone who would never return. Slowly, carefully, Nicholas crouched a few paces away. Rex turned his head, ears twitching, his gaze narrowing with instinctive caution. This was not the first child to notice him. Children had tugged at their parents, pointed, giggled. But this boy did not laugh. His eyes were steady, sorrowful, reflecting the same ache that pulsed in Rex's chest. The boy pulled from his coat pocket a piece of bread wrapped in tissue. His grandmother, before she passed away as well, had taught him to always keep a small snack for journeys, because hunger can appear when you least expect it. Nicholas extended the bread, his thin fingers trembling in the cold. Rex watched, nostrils flaring at the scent, his paws shifted, claws scratching ice. For a moment, instinct told him to retreat. Trust was a dangerous luxury, yet the boy did not push closer. He simply held his hand steady, eyes lowered in a gesture of respect. After several seconds, Rex stepped forward, his wet nose brushing the boy's knuckles before he snapped the bread gently from the offered hand. Nicholas smiled faintly, the first true smile that had crossed his face in weeks. It was small, fragile, but real. From that moment, a silent thread bound them. Over the following days, Nicholas sought out Rex whenever his father's duties brought them to the airport. Sometimes he waited near the cafeteria, where the smell of cabbage soup and fried cutlets drifted. He would pocket scraps to bring to the dog. Sometimes he lingered near the baggage carts, where Rex often prowled, his lean body weaving between wheels. Each time the shepherd's caution eased, his ears lowering, his eyes softening as he accepted the boy's offerings. In return, Nicholas spoke to him in whispers, telling him things he told no one else, about how quiet the apartment felt at night, about the way his father's voice grew distant when he asked questions about his mother, about how the world seemed bigger and heavier without her laughter. Rex listened. He tilted his head, amber eyes focused, as if he understood the weight of each word. And perhaps he did, for grief spoke a language older than human speech, one carved into silence and presence. It was not only Nicholas who noticed the bond forming. A woman named Tatiana, who worked as a ticketing clerk in her late 20s, slender with auburn hair always tucked behind her ears, often watched them from the window. She had grown up on a farm with animals, and she knew the signs of trust when she saw Rex lean closer to Nicholas. "That boy," she murmured to her colleague one evening, "he is the only one the dog allows." Her colleague shrugged, indifferent, but Tatiana found herself carrying small bits of leftover food from her lunch to leave where Nicholas could collect them. She had no children of her own. Her fiancé had died in an accident 3 years earlier, leaving her cautious about forming new attachments. But the sight of the boy and the dog stirred something gentle in her. One afternoon, a janitor named Pavel, stout and round-faced with a booming laugh that filled corridors, teased Nicholas for sitting on the cold floor beside Rex. "Careful, boy. That dog looks like he could eat you in 2 bites." His words were playful, but Nicholas only looked up and replied quietly, "He's just waiting, like me." Pavel blinked, chuckled awkwardly, and walked on, yet the words stayed with him long after. By late March, the snow began to soften, dripping from the eaves of the terminal in long icicles that shattered on the ground. The days grew longer, though the air still bit with chill. Rex's coat shed in thick tufts, his body lean but steady thanks to scraps Nicholas faithfully provided. When Victor noticed his son's absence one evening, he followed and discovered Nicholas crouched beside the shepherd, stroking his ears. At first, Victor's face hardened, ready to scold airports were no place for strays. But then he paused, seeing how his boy's posture, usually tense, was relaxed, how his lips moved in words he never spoke at home. Victor's chest tightened. He did not call out. He turned and walked back inside, his own silence heavier than before. For Nicholas and Rex, however, silence was not emptiness. It was presence. In those hours by the fence, they stitched together their broken hearts, each finding in the other what the world had taken away. And though neither could know it yet, this was the beginning of a friendship that would defy the passing of seasons, the indifference of officials, and even the cruelty of abandonment. By the time spring began to loosen the frost that clung to Moscow, Nicholas's visits to the airport had woven themselves into quiet rituals. His father, Victor, often scheduled long flight routes and briefings, and though he tried not to admit it aloud, he found it easier to bring his son to Vnukovo than leave him at home in the silence of their small apartment. Nicholas never complained. He carried his little satchel, inside which he tucked scraps of food saved from their modest kitchen, and slipped away whenever his father's attention turned to duty. He knew exactly where to find Rex now, either by the chain-link fence that bordered the runway or at the edge of the freight docks where shadows gathered. Rex, for his part, had changed too. His coat, once ragged, showed new sheen from the meals Nicholas shared, and his eyes, though still searching the skies for the man who abandoned him, glowed warmer when the boy approached. Each time Nicholas knelt to stroke the shepherd's ears, Rex leaned closer, shoulders loosening as though, for a moment, the burden of waiting could rest on someone else's heart. The bond had not gone unnoticed by the people who worked there every day. There was Anna, a middle-aged woman who manned the small cafeteria on the terminal's second floor. She was stout with flushed cheeks from standing near hot stoves all day, her dark hair streaked with silver and always tied in a bun that sagged under her cap. Anna had been widowed during the war, raising 2 daughters alone. Life had made her brisk, but beneath her practical nature was a soft current of generosity. She began to look the other way when Nicholas slipped into the kitchen's back door, passing him a cutlet wrapped in napkin or a bowl of borscht quickly covered with bread. "For your friend," she would say gruffly, pretending she was indifferent, though her eyes often softened. Then there was Sergei, a ground mechanic in his 40s, tall with broad shoulders, his face permanently marked by grease stains that never fully washed away. His fingers were thick, scarred from years of labor on engines, but his smile was unexpectedly warm. Sergei had grown up in an orphanage, abandoned as a child, and when he saw Rex waiting day after day, he recognized the pain of loyalty, unrewarded. One night, while refueling an aircraft, he noticed Rex shivering against the wind and muttered, "Stubborn fool," before taking off his own wool scarf and draping it around the dog's neck. Rex had startled, then stilled, allowing it. Sergei never told anyone, but from then on, the mechanic always left a tin of scraps near the maintenance sheds where Rex often prowled. Nicholas's own routine grew daring. He began to walk Rex around the outer edges of the airfield when guards weren't watching. He liked the crunch of gravel underfoot, Rex's quiet padding beside him, the illusion that they belonged somewhere together. Sometimes he whispered about his mother, about the lullabies she used to sing when he couldn't sleep. Sometimes he said nothing at all, only walked, feeling the dog's presence like a steady flame against the dark coldness of life without her. Yet not everyone at the airport welcomed Rex. A new security officer, Captain Lebedev, had joined staff that April. He was in his late 30s, lean with a hawkish nose and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. His uniform was spotless, his boots polished, and his manner clipped, a man who believed rules were iron rails keeping society from collapse. Lebedev had fought briefly in border patrols, an experience that had made him distrustful of strays, whether human or animal. To him, Rex represented disorder, a violation of regulation. "A dog has no place here," he told his subordinates one morning, his voice cutting as steel. "Remove it before something happens to a passenger." His words sent murmurs through staff, some nodding, others uneasy. It was Tatiana, the auburn-haired clerk who had once watched Nicholas feed Rex, who dared to speak in opposition. In private, she told Lebedev, "That dog harms no one. He waits only. The boy, he needs him." Lebedev frowned, lips tightening. He was not a cruel man, but inflexible, and his sense of order left little room for compassion. "Regulations are not changed by sympathy," he replied. That tension hovered in the background as Nicholas's friendship with Rex deepened. Evenings at Vnukovo became a kind of secret world. After the last flights had departed and the lights on the runways dimmed to distant beacons, Nicholas would steal outside, Rex padding close, and sit near the perimeter. The boy would lean against the shepherd's warm side, listening to his heartbeat under fur. Sometimes Rex would lift his head sharply at the sound of an approaching plane, ears rigid, eyes burning with anticipation. Nicholas always placed a hand on his neck then, whispering softly, "It's not him, but I am here." One night in early May, a storm blew in from the west, the kind that rattled windows and made the control tower lights flicker. Rain slashed against glass, and the airfield became a slick of reflected neon. Rex had no shelter. Nicholas, slipping away from the waiting area, found him crouched under the wing of a grounded aircraft, water dripping from his ears. Without hesitation, the boy removed his own coat, thin though it was, and draped it over Rex. The shepherd pressed close, sharing his body warmth in return. That sight child and dog huddled against the fury of the storm was glimpsed by Sergei the mechanic, who paused in his rounds and felt a lump rise in his throat. Later he told Anna in the cafeteria, "That boy and the dog, they are keeping each other alive." Word of the pair spread quietly. Passengers came and went, some noticing, some not. But among the workers of Vnukovo, the story grew like an underground current. To some, Rex became a nuisance. To others, he was a symbol of loyalty, a reminder that not everything in life could be scheduled or ordered by official decree. Nicholas himself began to change. His teachers at school, stern women in gray cardigans, remarked to Victor that the boy's eyes seemed brighter lately, that he raised his hand more often. Victor, though baffled, suspected the truth. He had once caught sight of his son returning from the runway, hair damp with rain, cheeks flushed, Rex trotting at his side like a guardian. He wanted to forbid it, but the words died on his tongue. He remembered the hollow silence of their apartment after his wife's death, and thought, perhaps, the dog had filled a void he himself could not. Still, Lebedev did not relent. Each week he filed reports about the animal hazard loitering near passengers. Each week paperwork moved slowly through the channels of bureaucracy. But his persistence threatened the fragile sanctuary Nicholas and Rex had built. And though Nicholas did not know it yet, the day would come when Lebedev's orders would test their bond against the weight of rules. For now, however, as spring warmed into summer, Rex remained. He was no longer just a stray haunting the airport. He had become part of its rhythm, a silent passenger whose flight never arrived, a creature who shared his waiting with a boy who, in his own way, was waiting too. By the time summer's heat rolled across Moscow and turned the concrete of Vnukovo into a shimmering mirage, Rex's presence at the airport was no longer a curiosity whispered about among staff but a matter of debate. Some had grown fond of the shepherd, calling him our silent passenger, a creature who seemed to carry sorrow with dignity. Others, especially new managers pressured by regulations from above, saw only liability. A large dog among streams of travelers, unpredictable, perhaps dangerous. The divide grew sharper with each passing week, and Nicholas soon found himself at the center of storms he could neither predict nor control. It began with a meeting between senior staff. Among them was Director Mikhailov, the airport's chief administrator. He was in his early 50s, short and barrel-chested, with thinning hair combed over his head and a wide mustache he twirled when thinking. His eyes, pale gray, carried suspicion even when his voice was calm. Years of bureaucratic survival had made him cautious, sometimes harsh, a man who measured life by regulations and numbers. "This cannot continue," he declared one morning, his tone sharp as he waved a file marked Incident Reports. "A stray dog roaming the grounds is an embarrassment. Worse, a risk. Imagine headlines if a passenger is bitten." His words struck fear in the room. Captain Lebedev, the hawk-eyed security officer, nodded eagerly. "I have said it for months. The dog must be removed. Regulations are clear." His voice cut through the murmurs, his thin lips pressed into a hard line. But not all agreed. Tatiana, the auburn-haired clerk, stepped forward timidly. "With respect, Director, the dog has harmed no one. He has been here for over a year now. Many passengers know him. Some even ask about him. He is part of this place." Her words hung fragile, but sincerity rang through them. Mikhailov dismissed her with a wave, yet unease rippled across the room. It was around this time Nicholas overheard whispers about plans to send Rex to a pound on the outskirts of the city. The boy's heart clenched. At night, lying in his bed beneath peeling wallpaper, he could not sleep, hearing only Rex's steady panting and imagining him locked in a cold cage, forgotten. When dawn broke, One evening, after returning late from a flight, Victor sat Nicholas at the table. The man's uniform still smelled faintly of jet fuel, his face shadowed by fatigue. "Nicholas," he began, voice low, "this dog, he is not your responsibility. He is stray. You cannot save every lost thing. Nicholas stared at the table, fists clenched. He isn't just a dog. He's waiting, like Mama never came back. And you... His words faltered, but the truth burned in his chest. He felt his father had abandoned him emotionally, retreating into work instead of grief. Victor stiffened, his jaw tightening. He wanted to respond, to explain that flying was the only place he still felt in control, but words failed him. Silence stretched, heavy, until Nicholas fled to his room. That night, he told Rex everything. Curled beside the shepherd near the fence, Nicholas whispered into fur that smelled of grass and dust. He doesn't understand, but you do. Rex's ears flicked, his amber eyes steady, the weight of his head pressed against the boy's knees. And for Nicholas, that was enough. As tensions mounted, new figures entered their lives. There was Yuri, a janitor in his late 20s, tall and lanky with a mop of blonde curls and a nervous laugh. He had grown up in a workers' dormitory, his mother dying when he was young, and carried the habit of befriending strays. He discovered Nicholas one evening feeding Rex behind the baggage depot. "Careful, boy," Yuri said softly, his voice more kind than warning. "They're watching these days. If they catch the dog here, he won't stay free long." When Nicholas's face fell, Yuri sighed and ruffled his hair awkwardly. "Don't worry. I'll turn a blind eye. I know what it is to hold on to something no one else values." From then on, Yuri became another quiet protector, distracting guards when necessary or leaving buckets of water near Rex's haunts. Yet pressure from management only grew. Posters warning about health hazards from stray animals appeared in staff corridors. Lebedev increased patrols, his sharp eyes scanning corners where Rex might hide. One afternoon, Rex was nearly caught when a pair of guards cornered him near the cargo hangar. He bared his teeth, muscles tense, until Nicholas appeared, calling softly. Against instinct, the dog retreated, following the boy into safety. The guards reported the incident, and whispers spread. "Dangerous. Must be taken away." At school, Nicholas's teachers noticed his distraction. A woman named Irina, tall and thin with stern cheekbones softened by kind gray eyes, called him aside. "You draw dogs in your notebooks," she said, lifting a page. "This one, it has your eyes." Nicholas blushed but said nothing. Irina placed a hand on his shoulder. She had lost her brother during the war, and she recognized grief when she saw it. "Hold on to what comforts you," she whispered. "But be careful, comfort is fragile." Her warning echoed in him. The breaking point came in late August, when a passenger complained after Rex startled a child near the terminal doors. In truth, Rex had only barked at a dropped suitcase, but rumor twisted quickly. Director Mikhailov signed an order. The dog was to be captured within the week and sent away. Lebedev prepared the operation eagerly, dispatching men with nets and tranquilizers. Nicholas heard of it through Yuri, who found him near the cafeteria and knelt, his lanky frame folding awkwardly. "They're serious this time," Yuri whispered, glancing around. "Keep him hidden or you'll lose him." Panic surged in Nicholas. That night, he and Rex ventured farther than ever into the woods beyond the parking lots. He begged the dog to stay, to not return to the runways, but Rex, faithful to his vigil, resisted. His eyes kept turning back to the glowing horizon where planes lifted into the night. Finally, Nicholas clutched his fur and sobbed, "Please, you'll be taken." Rex licked his cheek, tail thumping softly, but when dawn came, he returned once more to his spot by the fence, resolute. Nicholas knew then that he could not change Rex's nature. Loyalty was his heartbeat, waiting his breath. All the boy could do was shield him as long as possible, and in doing so, Nicholas discovered his own quiet strength. He was no longer just a grieving child. He had become a protector, standing against rules and fear for the sake of a friend who had no voice but whose devotion was absolute. By the autumn of the second year, Rex had become more than just a stray clinging to the fences of Vnukovo. He was a presence woven into the fabric of the airport itself. The story of his waiting, whispered for months by staff and murmured between passengers, finally burst beyond the gates when a young journalist named Elena Morozova caught sight of the shepherd during a layover. Elena was 26, tall and slim, with dark chestnut hair cut into a sharp bob that framed her pale face. Her green eyes, curious and restless, seemed always to search for meaning in ordinary things. She had grown up in Leningrad, daughter of a literature professor and a nurse, and carried within her a quiet rebellion against a world that often seemed too gray, too controlled. Her fiancé had been lost in an industrial accident the year before, and since then she threw herself into her work, chasing human stories as if they might stitch back her own broken heart. On that particular day, Elena had been stranded between connecting flights. Bored, she wandered the perimeter with her camera slung over her shoulder. That was when she saw Rex, sitting upright by the runway fence, his gaze fixed on the horizon where planes disappeared into clouds, his amber eyes burning with eternal patience. Nearby, Nicholas crouched with a hand resting against Rex's back, speaking softly as if confiding secrets to an old friend. Elena froze, captivated. She lifted her camera and snapped a photograph, the boy and the dog framed against the rising silver of a departing aircraft. She knew instantly this was not just a picture but a story. Elena introduced herself to Nicholas with a gentle smile, crouching so her tall figure would not intimidate him. She had always been good with children, her voice low and even. Nicholas, shy at first, eventually spoke, telling her about Rex, how he had been waiting for nearly 2 years. Elena listened intently, her brow furrowed with both sorrow and fascination. She jotted notes, asked careful questions, and by the time her delayed flight was ready, she had promised Nicholas that people would know Rex's story. The article appeared in Komsomolskaya Pravda 2 weeks later, under the headline, "The Dog Who Waits." The photograph of Rex and Nicholas spread across Moscow and beyond. Letters poured into the editorial office. Children wrote about how they wanted to visit Rex. Elderly veterans spoke of loyalty, reminding them of comrades lost in war. Mothers confessed to crying at the thought of such faithfulness. Within weeks, the story had been reprinted in regional papers. Radio broadcasts discussed it, and Rex became a quiet sensation. At Vnukovo, the change was immediate. Passengers now sought him out deliberately. Families approached the fence to see the shepherd, snapping photographs with clunky cameras, some tossing sausages or biscuits wrapped in napkins. Children giggled with delight, waving small toys through the mesh. Once a woman in her 50s with kind gray eyes, wrapped in a thick wool coat, knelt and pressed a knitted scarf through the wire. "For you, devoted one," she whispered. Rex accepted it cautiously, the fabric later draped around his shoulders by Nicholas with pride. Staff attitudes shifted as well. Where once whispers about removal had filled corridors, now Rex was tolerated, even celebrated. Anna, the cafeteria cook, began saving extra meat patties specifically for him, wrapping them carefully for Nicholas to deliver. Sergei the mechanic grumbled less about rules, and instead began keeping a battered tin bowl near his workshop, always filled with water. Even Pavel, the jovial janitor, once skeptical, boasted to passengers, "That's our airport dog, most loyal traveler in the Union." Not everyone was pleased. Director Mikhailov fumed privately that the story had stolen control from his hands. "We are running an airport, not a circus," he barked in one meeting. Yet even he dared not defy the public sentiment now swirling like a storm. Captain Lebedev too seethed, his hawk eyes narrower than ever. But with cameras arriving daily, reporters snapping pictures of Rex by the runway, even he was forced into silence. Bureaucracy bowed to publicity, and Rex remained untouchable. For Nicholas, the change was profound. No longer did he have to sneak through corridors with scraps hidden in his bag. He could approach Rex openly, his father watching from a distance with less disapproval. Victor had read Elena's article as well, and though he never admitted aloud how it affected him, Nicholas noticed subtle differences. His father began to linger more often when Nicholas sat beside Rex. Sometimes he even crouched, laying a tentative hand on the shepherd's fur, his blue-gray eyes softening in ways Nicholas had never seen since his mother's death. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the sky and plains glowed golden in its light, Victor sat with Nicholas and Rex together by the fence. For a long time, they said nothing, just listened to engines roar overhead. Finally, Victor murmured, "He waits as you have waited, my son, and I have not made waiting easier." His voice cracked, rare emotion breaking through his stoic mask. Nicholas leaned against him cautiously, and for the first time in many months, father and son felt the warmth of each other's presence, bridged by the dog who had become their shared anchor. Elena returned weeks later, drawn by the response to her article. She found Nicholas and Rex in their usual place and greeted them like old friends. This time she brought gifts, a leather collar donated by a reader embossed with the word Vernest, loyalty. Nicholas clasped it around Rex's neck with trembling hands. "It suits him," Elena said softly, her green eyes glistening. She stayed long enough to see how the bond between boy and dog had deepened, then wrote a follow-up piece about the family of three, hinting that Rex had not only waited for his master but had healed a family fractured by loss. Public response grew wilder. Donations arrived for Rex's care, letters addressed to the airport dog piled in sacks. Some officials even suggested making him a mascot of Vnukovo. And while bureaucrats argued over details, ordinary people kept coming, strangers from villages, students, elderly couples, all wanting to see the shepherd who waited. For Rex, none of it mattered. Crowds did not interest him, cameras did not sway him. His amber eyes still turned every dusk toward the horizon where planes lifted into clouds. His vigil never ceased. Yet now he was no longer alone in it. Nicholas was always by his side, his father gradually closer, and behind them the murmuring voices of countless others who believed in his faithfulness. The airport that once threatened to push him away now sheltered him, and though the ache of abandonment still pulsed within Rex's loyal heart, he had found something new: recognition, belonging, and a boy whose quiet companionship gave meaning to his endless wait. By the following spring, the story of Rex had reached nearly every corner of the Soviet Union. From factory floors to village schools, people whispered about the faithful shepherd of Vnukovo. Children wrote essays about him. Veterans recounted his patience with tears shining in their eyes. Travelers arriving from distant provinces asked at once, "Where is the dog?" Rex had become more than an animal. He was a mirror in which people saw the best parts of themselves, a reminder that loyalty could endure even in a world so often ruled by loss. But time pressed forward, and with it came the question of what should become of him. It was Elena Morozova, the young journalist who had first carried Rex's story beyond the gates of the airport, who began to search for a lasting solution. One evening she arrived at Vnukovo again, her tall frame wrapped in a long beige coat, her dark hair tucked beneath a woolen beret. Her green eyes, tired from work but still alight with determination, scanned the fence until she saw Rex, amber eyes fixed on the horizon as always. Nicholas sat nearby, his knees drawn up, whispering to the dog. Elena approached quietly, the soft snow crunching under her boots. She crouched beside Nicholas. "He waits still," she murmured. Nicholas nodded, his face solemn. He had grown taller over the past months, though he still looked fragile in his oversized coat. Elena placed a gloved hand on his shoulder. "There may be a family for him now, people who can give him a home." Nicholas looked up sharply. "A home? But what about here?" His voice cracked with fear. Elena hesitated before answering. She had met a woman named Vera Ivanova through her reporting, an older widow in her early 60s, short and slender, with soft gray hair pinned into a bun and warm hazel eyes that carried both kindness and sorrow. Vera had lost her son in an accident years earlier, and now lived alone in a modest dacha outside Moscow, surrounded by orchards and hens. Despite her grief, she had remained generous, tending her neighbors' children, sharing preserves and bread. When she read about Rex, she had written to Elena, "If the dog needs a place, I have room. I know what it is to wait for someone who never returns." Elena introduced Vera to Nicholas a week later at the airport. The boy eyed her warily at first. Vera knelt down despite the stiffness in her knees, her wool coat sagging slightly, and extended a hand to Rex. The shepherd sniffed, ears flicking, then pressed his nose gently into her palm. Vera smiled, her lined face glowing with gentle recognition. "You are tired of waiting, aren't you?" she whispered. Nicholas watched in silence, torn between hope and dread. The days that followed were filled with debate. Director Mikhailov, the airport administrator, argued that with public sentiment so high, it would be wise to resolve the dog matter honorably. Captain Lebedev, still rigid, insisted Rex should remain nowhere near the airfield, but the weight of letters, visits, and media attention made it impossible to act harshly. At last, the decision was made. Rex would be placed in Vera's care, with the blessing of the community. The night before the farewell, Nicholas could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of his father preparing for a flight. At dawn, he dressed quickly and hurried to the airport. Rex was there, as always, waiting at the fence, eyes trained on the horizon. Nicholas threw his arms around the shepherd's neck, burying his face in thick fur. "They say you'll be safe now," he whispered, his voice breaking. But who will listen to me if you're gone? Rex licked the tears from his cheeks, tail sweeping the ground. When the day came, many gathered. Elena with her camera, Tatiana the clerk with auburn hair, Anna from the cafeteria carrying a parcel of cutlets, Sergei the mechanic standing silently with grease still smudged on his hands, and Yuri the lanky janitor, smiling nervously. Even Director Mikhailov attended, his mustache twitching as he tried to mask emotion. Victor stood beside his son, stiff in his pilot's uniform, though his hand rested firmly on Nicholas's shoulder. Vera approached slowly, her step steady. She carried a simple leash made of worn leather. "Come, Rex," she called softly. The shepherd looked between her and Nicholas, ears pricked, body trembling with indecision. Nicholas nodded through his tears. "Go. You deserve a home." After a long pause, Rex stepped forward, pressing against Vera's side. The crowd let out a collective sigh, some wiping their eyes. Nicholas wept openly. Victor crouched beside him, wrapping both arms around his son. "He is not leaving you," Victor whispered. "He is carrying your love with him." For the first time since his wife's death, Victor spoke with warmth, his voice breaking. Nicholas clung to him, feeling a bond heal where silence had reigned for so long. In the weeks that followed, life changed. Vera welcomed Rex into her dacha, where he patrolled the orchard, lay beside the fire, and finally slept without shivering. She brushed his coat each morning, fed him hearty stews, and spoke to him as if to the son she had lost. Neighbors came to visit, children running through the yard, eager to pet the famous dog. Rex accepted it all calmly, yet his eyes would sometimes drift toward the sky, where planes cut across the clouds. Waiting remained part of him, but now he waited with peace rather than despair. Nicholas continued to visit with his father on days off. The boy laughed more now, his grief no longer strangling him. He and Victor planted flowers together in memory of his mother, and though the ache never vanished, father and son learned to face it together. When they visited Rex, the shepherd bounded to greet them, tail wagging fiercely, amber eyes alight with joy. Nicholas no longer feared abandonment. He had given Rex safety, and Rex had given him the courage to live again. The story spread even further. Soviet radio told of Rex's new home. A children's book was written. Photographs of him in Vera's orchard appeared in newspapers. He became a living symbol of loyalty, of love between man and animal, of how even wounds of loss could be healed by compassion. And though the planes still roared above Vnukovo, carrying passengers to places unknown, the shepherd no longer waited at the fence. His vigil had ended, but his legend had just begun. The story of Rex is more than just about a loyal dog at an airport. It is a reminder for us in daily life. Loyalty, love, and patience have the power to heal broken hearts and bring people together. In a world where many things feel temporary, we can all learn from Rex's example to stay true, to care deeply, and to never give up on those we love. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others so they may also find hope in Rex's journey. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, subscribe for more stories like this, and let us continue spreading kindness together. May God bless everyone watching this. And if you believe in the power of loyalty and love, type Amen in the comments.